Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to this channel. Let's talk boxing. Let's talk Anthony Joshua. He's given a fantastically fascinating interview to Kugan Cassius at IFL TV. He has broken his silence about what happened with Alexander Usyk. He's spoken about Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, his training team, plans moving forward, that trip to the US. He's covered everything. It's over an hour long, this interview. And in my humble opinion, it is very revealing in terms of what he really means, or perhaps what he's thinking, and where the contradictions are in his mind, because I believe there are some there. But it's also very revealing with regards to his mindset as a whole. There's just an awful lot there to delve into, and you have to be careful when you do this. Obviously, subscribers will know we really like to look at the psychology of a fighter, and we like to delve deep into various topics, intellectual topics that revolve around the sport, rather than just looking at the fight game itself. And that enables you to unlock the mind of a fighter. But there's a danger that you overanalyze. You know how, if you ever get one of those pretentious art critics, right, and you go and get a canvas, and you just get your 5-year-old and you give him a bunch of paints, and you say, you know what, just go and slap some paint on this canvas. Then you were to go and put that canvas in an art gallery, and you were to tell him this is an up-and-coming artist who's worth millions with every work of art he does. I've got a feeling a lot of those pretentious art critics will turn around and say, oh, yes, this is a masterpiece, a wonderful exploration of the human psyche, and it displays the turmoil involved in the transition from youth to adolescence and to adulthood, and just talking a whole bunch of rubbish. And in your mind, you're thinking, dude, a kid just did that. Like, just shut up, bro. Just go away. I can imagine a lot of people being like that when it comes to trying to overanalyze body language and things like that. I don't ever want to do that here on this channel. I don't want to just start talking rubbish for the sake of trying to seek to be intellectual. But that's not to say that you can't find some really revealing things when somebody's talking. And I believe with AJ, we see a lot of those underlying hidden connotations, and you see it in this interview. So let's talk about these things. First and foremost, there's been a lot of talk about the style of Anthony Joshua, how it's evolved. He used to fight like a big man. He used to walk guys down. Carl Froch's spoken about how he wants to see him revert to that and go back to basics and stick with Robert McCracken. You've had people like Hatman, who, although is an online analyst, he's a fantastic boxing analyst. He feels that he wants to see him being a lot more fluid, much like Lennox Lewis was a big fighter who was a lot more fluid. He wants to see AJ working on that fluidity. So you see these different contrasting views. And Anthony Joshua addresses why he essentially moved away from what he was doing before. He was saying how he loves to go to war. That's how he sees himself as a fighter. But for reasons of longevity, he felt the need to develop this concept of hit and don't get hit, and to develop a more fluid style. But he says for the rematch, he's going to revert to what he knows and loves best. And he says it's going to be straight war. And he basically admits that he's going to do some dirty things. Throw Usyk on the floor, hit him in the hip, let the referee get involved and say stop. Now, this is something that I've alluded to in the past, and I've said this is what he needs to do. Get his hands on Usyk, try to break his construct, throw him, hit him on low blows, hit him on the hip, back of the ring, rabbit punches. The referee might not stop him, might not say to him, stop doing this. He might get away with an awful lot. Vladimir Klitschko got away with an awful lot. Floyd Mayweather got away with an awful lot. Muhammad Ali got away with an awful lot. Every time you come into range against Muhammad Ali, grab the top of your head and pull your head down and lean on the cervical spine of your neck. You're not allowed to do that. But the referee isn't always on point with these things, right? Andre Ward, I can list you a whole bunch of fantastic fighters who got away with the dark arts. And it looks like he's alluding to the fact that he's going to try and do this. He's saying this is what needs to be done. He's about to go to war. Now, one of the interesting things, though, I've said consistently, yes, this is what he needs to do. But if you are going full throttle in that way, and to turn it physical and turn it dirty, unless you're leaning a lot to tie up and lean, to relax, to learn how, I've said he needs to get a wrestling coach in order to learn how to tie up, to rest while he's making an opponent carry his weight. So while he's resting his lungs, his opponent is still being forced to carry excess weight, and so his opponent's getting more and more tired. These are the things that Anthony Joshua needs to work on, right? Well, he's also, though, if he's going to look to really put it on him and fight like the big man, and unless you're going to be leaning like that, if you're going to look to be destructive on the inside, it is going to exert a lot of energy. You're going to have to take more risks. And as I've said, that will increase your chances of winning early early on, inflicting enough damage early on to swing the fight in your favor and ultimately win the fight. But it also increases your chances of getting knocked out because you're more likely to gas. The more risks you take, you're more likely to walk onto shots and stuff like that. Well, what is interesting, a little contradictory comment he made later on in the interview, is when I looked at the other two fights a couple of weeks later, in other words, Wilder and Fury, after 2-3 rounds, the energy levels were depleted. So he's making a case there for why it's important to box. He's telling you, you can't just go out there and go to war because you're going to get caught. He talks about your speech will eventually go, your reflexes will go. So he's talking about longevity, but he's also talking in the short term about energy levels being too depleted when you go out far too hard. But then he's saying that's what he has to revert to for Alexander Usyk, which fits into what I've been telling you so far about increasing chances of winning whilst increasing chances of getting knocked out. When he was asked about Ruiz and Usyk, which was the worst defeat of the two, I found this very, very interesting, right? Again, contradictory, but why would he say these things? So hear me out on this. He says you could see certain things on the ring walk that weren't quite right when he was referring to the Ruiz fight. He said that he found out some information post-fight which enabled him to understand what was going on with him. Now, he's always said no excuses, and that is an excuse. That doesn't mean an excuse has no validity to it, right? If you're going to go for a run and you're Usain Bolt and you've, I don't know, strained your Achilles heel and you lose in the final of the 100-meter race, yeah, it's an excuse to say, you know what, my Achilles heel was playing up. It doesn't mean you're lying. It doesn't mean there's no validity to that excuse. So I'm not saying he's lying or anything, but he has brought up that excuse whilst also saying that the reason Usyk therefore felt like his first proper loss is because of self-accountability. So number one, he's making the excuse and he's talking in a much more aggressive manner. There's a lot of swearing going on. That's not typically AJ. We'll get to that in a moment, right? The personality, the personality he's trying to put across. We'll get to that in a moment. But he talks about this self-accountability. But then when he's asked what the plan was against Usyk, was it to outbox the boxer? He said, you'd have to ask the team what the plan was because I'm a product of what I'm taught in the gym. I'm a sponge. If you feed me the right information, I'll just soak it up. So you have to ask the team what the plan was. In other words, he's saying it's self-accountability, but then he's saying, well, look, I'm going to have to revert to my old style because that's what works. This wasn't ever going to work, but you're going to have to ask the team what the plan was. In other words, it was the team that came up with the game plan. So he's saying self-accountability, but then he's sort of shifting it onto the training team, which again doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. The game plan may have been you can outbox Usyk. He might have been saying, listen, I want to fight this guy. Anthony, trust me, this is the best way forward. And he might have followed it. So again, an excuse isn't necessarily a lie, but it is an excuse. Where's the self-accountability? Should he have adapted mid-fight when he realized that things weren't going his way? Well, he addresses this too, and he claims that he didn't have an indication as to how the fight was going because you're touching the opponent, he's saying. So I can't see, I'm relying on my team to let me know. Well, isn't it interesting that he would allude to that when he's saying things like, you had Robert McCracken shouting, brilliant, AJ, brilliant, from the sidelines when it clearly wasn't going particularly well. So what he's basically saying is when you're in there with the adrenaline pumping, you're not quite sure how it's going. Because it's not like he was getting battered throughout the fight. He said he felt that he lost the fight in the last 3 rounds. It ran away from him. But prior to that, it was a boxing match and he was getting caught with the more solid shots. So in his mind, if he's thinking, you know what, I'm touching him sometimes, maybe I'm edging these and my trainers are shouting brilliant, brilliant. Essentially what he's saying is I'm a product of my environment. He also says I let them do the film study. I let them do it. They're my team. He's gifting the responsibility to them. And it's interesting because later on when he talks about Tyson Fury, he goes out of his way to praise Sugar Hill. He said, you got to give a round of applause to Sugar Hill. That was great corner work. Yeah, so if you start to read between the lines, you can start to see that although he's claiming self-accountability, he's clearly not happy with the way certain things went in that corner. You can see that. You can hear that in his voice. You can see that if you start to analyze and read between the lines of the things he's saying. But it is a concern because I've always felt that Anthony Joshua was a thinking fighter. And perhaps I still feel that. And maybe it's just an excuse he's coming up with, right? But if you're a thinking fighter, surely you should be seeking to figure out puzzles in the ring. Surely you should be realizing that things aren't going your way, right? The way he's making it sound is that he's not a thinking fighter. That actually what his corner tell him to do, he just goes and does like a machine. And therefore he's reliant on that corner. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. A lot of fighters are like that. But It's interesting, isn't it? Now, with regards to the constant swearing, you know, one of the things I find fascinating about this is the question of who Anthony Joshua really is. You know, the general consensus is that AJ is a guy who is basically a bit of a manufactured figure, shall we say, right? A corporate person's dream. He conducts himself like a statesman, but really, you know, that old phrase, that old reputation of Femi. Femi was a roadman, a tough guy, and all of a sudden he's coming across as differently. Dale Anthony Cook, who's one of my subscribers, messaged me on Twitter, and he said, one thing I'll say in his defense, AJ's defense, because he felt like a lot of what AJ was saying was contradictory. It seems like he's done with the humble PC brand rubbish. He can't quite shake it and slips back into it. That's an interesting take, because for me, I see it the other way around. I don't actually think, I know AJ might have been in trouble a little bit with the law in the past. Of course, your environment plays a role, right? But if you're talking about his nature, who he is as a human being, I think he's the gentle, not necessarily gentle, because he's a fighter, he's not gentle, but the polite aspect of him where he wants to learn and he wants to absorb information like a sponge, as he says, the respectful element of Anthony Joshua. I think that's the real AJ. All this stuff where he's sitting there and he's swearing in this interview and he's acting bad, so to speak, it doesn't come across as natural to me. I think he's trying to put out a persona, not to intimidate opponents, because, I mean, Alexander Usyk, for a start, barely going to understand anything he says. It's going to be relayed to him probably, you know. And secondly, even if he understands more than we think he understands, what might appear to be tough or intimidating to another British fighter or to an American fighter isn't going to translate in the same way to an Eastern European fighter. The culture's different. This idea of, towards the end of the interview, Anthony Joshua started talking about how he wasn't, he was putting on a bit of an accent, so he was semi-joking, but he was saying how he wasn't looking up to athletes when he was a kid. He was looking up to, and he started listing a series of gangsters. That's not going to intimidate Alexander Usyk. Alexander Usyk couldn't care whether you want to be some, you know, guy who developed a reputation on the street. It's not going to intimidate him. So what is the reason he's saying it? Well, number one is that he might be trying to get himself into this mentality of, I'm going to be a roadman. I'm going to be a warrior going into that ring. I'm going to leave no stone unturned in terms of aggression. Or perhaps it's a message to his fan base. And I think it's more of a message to his fan base. He's trying to convince others, don't give up on me yet. There was something going on with Andy Ruiz. We've never heard that before, right? There was something going on with Andy Ruiz, but I'm not going to tell you what it was. But there was something going on, right? And you know what? I'm Road. Don't think I'm not a dog. You're going to see this in me in the second fight. Now we go to war. He's trying to convince people, don't get off the bandwagon. Stick with me. But that doesn't mean he doesn't necessarily believe it. There's an element of defiance, true defiance to what he's saying. Because when Tyson Fury is brought up, and Wilder, he says Fury did really well against Deontay Wilder. It was a really good performance. He did really well for a man that had his first title defense. It's difficult to stay there at the top, he says, and he did well to come through the storm. That's a backhanded compliment. He's basically saying, well done, you finally had the first defense, right? I've had 11 of them. Or whatever it is. People up their game when they're up against a champion. Now they wanted your belt. Wilder wanted his belt. Look how much he improved, right? You're going to have to deal with this a lot more. So well done. For a first timer, you were really good. Is that not a backhanded compliment? Is that not a way of almost like tapping someone on the head? Good lad, you've done well. Later on, he's asked about whether he would allow Fury to train him for free, as he claimed. And Anthony Joshua said, yeah, he can train me. It might be the easiest way to get him in the ring too. We can get some cameras down there. And yeah, people can come and see how I work. Back in the day, people used to order these great fighters. You could see photos of them together in the gym. And they might have been rival fighters. So it's no problem for him to come down, see how the heavyweight champion, what he's up to and stuff like that. That's okay, he goes, you know. And he's saying it and he's laughing, he's joking. But think about what I've just said. Number one, might be the easiest way to get him in the ring, aka Fury ducks me. So he hasn't got the mindset of, wow, man, I've just lost. Fury's the main guy. No. Fury ducks me. Number two, people can come and see how the heavyweight champion works. AJ's not the heavyweight champion anymore. So why is he saying that? He's saying that because in his mind, he's still the champ. He's still the man. Just because you and I are saying he's got no belts, and just because the average Joe might be turning around and saying, oh man, I fancy Usyk, in his mind, this is temporary. And that is the mindset of a champion. You've got to give him that. There's defiance there. He's then asked about Deontay Wilder. And he says, yeah, when you look, he's come up against one or two good fighters, and now he's realised how hard it is to be up against the very best. And he talks again about the art of boxing, and he's saying, listen, he's getting the experience now, Deontay Wilder, and he could end up having a good career in 4 or 5 years if he keeps building on it, right? So again, he's talking about him like he's a prospect, because he then goes on to say, I'm experienced, and he's just learning that now. But young fighters need to learn, he says, that it's good to be protected, in other words, to have a big promoter behind you, but don't do no cherry picking. Get out there and test your mettle. So he's calling Deontay Wilder a cherry picker. Now, the point I'm making here is that he's not doing this overtly. He's not coming out there trying to trash talk. Tyson Fury, you ducked me. You're nothing. Come down to the ring. We'll spar. I'll spark you out in sparring. We'll get the cameras out. We'll put it out to the world. Deontay Wilder, you're a bum. Who have you fought? You got a padded record. I'll smash you up anytime you want. There's none of that. It's gentle. It's subtle. There's an undertone. Yeah, I'm respectful, but I'm still the main man. This is just a glitch in the road. This is how he sees it. And you've got to respect that mindset. Whether you agree with him or not, you've got to respect that mindset. Now, finally, when it comes to the trainers and him going out to the United States, he was speaking about his current training setup, and he was saying how he's got 3 head trainers, basically 3 main guys, and how Joe B, Angel Fernandez, and Robert McCracken, and how they each offer something different. And he was saying they still need to work on their relationship, but I'm going to leave that to them. So there seems to be some sort of power struggle behind the scenes, which brings us to the idea of too many cooks potentially spoiling the broth. But from Anthony Joshua's perspective, in a way, I understand why he's got the 3 guys there, because if they're all offering something different, one of them offers back foot fluidity, the other one's about boxing, punching off the angles, the other one he calls the head poncho, the king of the daddy, I guess you could say, the head guy of the group in Robert McCracken. He brings his own style. The point is, he's trying to draw positives from each different angle, right? And he's trying to marry everything together. He's trying to learn and absorb information from everybody. That's the sort of guy that he is. He also, though, does say that there's an awful lot of, when he was talking about Sugar Hill and applauding him, and he was saying, look, where does he come from? Look at the history he comes from. He spoke about Nacho Berestein and what he was sort of passing down through the generations, and how Robert Garcia has taken on certain information from his father and grandfather. He's talking about all these different trainers. And what he's basically saying is that there is a lot to be said for tradition, for hand-me-downs of knowledge. And so he's saying that, when he's going out to the US, he may not be there forever. He may go for 6 months. Or he's saying maybe a trainer out there will be willing to work with him, but say, no, you've got to come on full time. So he's leaving the door open for a potential to move to the US. But essentially what he's saying, he goes on to say, a lot of people are messaging me, I'll train you, champ, but it'll cost you $1 million. And he starts laughing. He says, look, I'm not an idiot with my money. Loyalty is a good thing. As well, but not to your detriment. That's another thing that goes out of character of AJ. AJ's always spoken about being humble, being loyal. So he's putting all the messages out there now to suggest that he is willing to move on. And he also spoke about the fact that if there's any regrets, he wishes he'd done this sooner. But that Robert McCracken's very laid back. It doesn't mean he's going to be let go or anything like that. He too went to the US when he was learning when he was planning his own career as a fighter for 3 years. So he's saying, he understands that. And he's essentially talking about having to go and branch out. And when he was talking about all these different great trainers, he was basically saying how he wouldn't commit to who's impressed him most, who's offered the most knowledge. But what he did allude to, although he keeps wearing the no boxing, no life, the Eddie Reynoso and Canelo sort of stable clothing, he did say something which suggests to me that he won't be going with Eddie Reynoso. He said that there was one thing he said is there was a cultural difference and a language barrier. And he was saying how, there are a lot of Afro-Caribbean style trainers out there, and he sees himself as an Afro-Caribbean fighter, he says. So there was some difference in culture there. And he mentioned Virgil Hunter and Ronnie Shields. So it looks like he's leaning more towards that. And I did mention in my own video where I was talking about potential of Vladimir Klitschko even training AJ as being one of the guys, and I spoke about all the positives and the positives of guys like Canelo's trainer, Eddie Reynoso, Virgil Hunter, Ronnie Shields. I did say one of the potential negatives was this cultural barrier, this language barrier. So, he spoke about how, because of certain trainers that are Afro-Caribbean, there will be like a father figure. So it does look like he wants to find somewhere where he wants to seek as though seek a sense of belonging, shall we say. So that could play a role in his decision as well, where he feels most at home, where he feels like he relates to somebody most culturally. But the point is, to end the video now, as I'll keep going on and on, you're talking about a guy who is all over the place a little bit with regards to accountability, but it's a guy who realizes that he feels he needs a change. It's a guy that genuinely still believes he's the main man, he's the champion, he hasn't lost his belief, but he's going for a shootout. It looks like he's going to leave it all on the line for the next fight, and he's saying he's going to go to war. And the fact that he's spoken about the other fight and suggesting that, look at these guys and their energies were depleted after 2-3 rounds, it suggests to you that he knows in the back of his mind it's make or break against Alexander Usyk. Let me know what you think about everything that he said. Let me know if you think there's any nuggets of psychology that you think I've missed out on that he mentioned. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. God bless. Chat to you soon.